They thought the trail west would be hard, but no one warned them it could disappear in a single night. The wagon train had stretched across the horizon like a spine of hope. 30 families bound for California, with nothing but rusted pots, salted pork, and hand-me-down dreams. Dust in their lungs, maps etched into memory. Children learning the word freedom without understanding its weight. Delia Thorne had ridden near the back, where the tired horses and louder children clustered. She'd had a small chest of her own, a few heirlooms, 2 spare dresses, a rifle with her father's initials, and 2 little hands that clung to her sleeves each night. When the raiders came, they didn't shout warnings. They set fires. They lit up the trail like judgment. And by morning, nothing was left but smoke, silence, and 2 wide-eyed children who no longer asked when they'd arrive, only if they'd survive. Delia Thorne didn't sleep that night. Not really. She closed her eyes between the rocks, holding Ruthie tight against her chest while Eli curled close to her hip, one small hand fisted around the frayed hem of her skirt. The fire had faded hours ago, but she could still smell it in her hair, in her skin, behind her eyes. She didn't know if any of the others had survived. She didn't call for them. Sound was dangerous now. Sound could draw back the men with torches and red scarves. The kind that didn't ask names, just took what they wanted and laughed at the silence left behind. So she waited for morning, one breath at a time, listening to the wind comb through blackened grass. At dawn, the world was gray, not because of fog, because of smoke. The trail they'd followed west was gone, consumed by flame and trampled under boot prints of men who'd come in the dark. The wagons were skeletal. The canvas tops had burned away. Iron frames stood like bones in the dust. A kettle hung from what used to be a campfire spit, swinging lazily in the breeze. Delia approached slowly, one hand behind her, steadying Eli. Ruthie clung to her leg. She scanned for signs, shoes, packs, weapons, bodies. There were too many of the lass. She didn't let the children look. Instead, she pointed them toward a patch of shade and said, "You stay here, no matter what. You hear me?" Ruthie whimpered but nodded. Eli just watched her. He understood more than a boy his age should. Delia found a rifle under a burnt-out cart, half melted but still whole. It wasn't hers. Hers had been lost in the fire, but this one had a single round still in the chamber. She clicked it open, checked it, closed it, then slung it over her shoulder and moved to the next wagon. Someone had tried to run. Their footprints led west, then doubled back. She followed them for 20 yards before they disappeared into blood and dust. She knelt there for a long time, not to pray, to remember. If she ever made it to another town, someone might ask her what happened. She wanted to be able to say it true. Who went which way? Who was last seen? Who might have made it? Might. The word felt useless now. By noon, the sun had burned through the smoke. It got hot, too hot for sitting in shadows. So Delia gathered what she could. 2 canteens, one punctured, one intact, a sack of flour sealed tight, half a spool of twine, and a torn leather map case. She opened the case and held her breath. Inside was a rough, hand-drawn route, forked trails, water stops, a note that read, "Shortcut through Horseshoe Pass, steep but fast." She rolled it back up and shoved it under her belt. When she returned to the children, Ruthie was asleep. Eli was awake. He pointed at the rifle. "You gonna shoot someone?" "Hope not," Delia said. "But you can?" She looked at him for a moment, then said, "If I have to." They left the ruins behind at dusk. Delia didn't say goodbye to anyone or anything. What was there to say goodbye to? She carried Ruthie on her back and held Eli's hand, walking west toward the broken road the map had named Horseshoe. The rifle hung heavy across her back, but not as heavy as the silence. By the second day, water ran low. Eli stopped asking if they were close. Delia tore a strip from her petticoat, soaked it, and had the children suck the moisture from it one by one. It wasn't enough. She cursed herself for not having taken more from the wreckage. But how could she? She'd chosen to run, not gather. That choice had saved the children, but it might kill them now. On the 3rd morning, they found a shallow grave, freshly turned earth, a cross made from wagon wood. Delia approached it cautiously. Beside it lay a hat. She knew that hat. Ben Holloway, scout, mid-30s, 2 kids back east. He'd come west to earn enough for a ranch. She said his name aloud, softly. Ben, then dug with her bare hands next to the mound. Not to uncover him, but to see if he'd left anything behind. She found a flask, empty, and under a flat rock, a tin badge. She turned it over. It read, Deputy, Blue Ridge Junction. That night, they made camp beneath a small grove of scrub oak. Delia started a fire for the first time since the attack. Just a small one, shielded by rocks. She boiled a pinch of flour in the canteen top. It tasted like ash, but the children slept with warm bellies. And that was something. At dawn, she heard hooves. Just one. Slow. Measured. She rose silently, rifle in hand. Eli stirred but didn't speak. He'd learned to be quiet. Delia stepped out from the trees. A man rode into view. Alone. Gray horse. Long coat. Wide-brimmed hat. One boot dragging slightly in the stirrup. Injured, maybe. He didn't raise a weapon. He just tipped his head. Ma'am, he said. Delia didn't lower the rifle. You following us? No, he said. Saw the smoke 2 days ago. Just figured someone might have made it. You with them? His face tightened. No, ma'am. If I was, I wouldn't be riding alone. She studied him, then said, What's your name? Gideon Kane. She blinked. That name's not a friend of many. He shrugged. Ain't been a friend of myself lately either. Delia didn't lower the rifle. Not when he said his name. Not even when he slid off the horse with a grunt and raised both hands. Don't know what you've heard about me, Gideon said, but I haven't drawn blood in over a year. Delia's voice stayed flat. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, ma'am, he replied. Just the truth. He stood there, coated in dust and silence. The kind of silence that follows gunfire. Not the kind that makes a woman trust you with her children. Eli stepped out from behind the tree. Small, thin, watching. Gideon's eyes shifted to the boy, then back to the rifle in Delia's grip. You can lower that if you like, he said gently. I ain't here to take anything. Delia didn't move. I lower this, you leave? I lower this, you help? She countered. He blinked once, then nodded. If you'll let me. Later, she still wouldn't let him near the fire, but she let him sit by it, a few feet away. The horse, Gray Jack he'd called it, was tied to a stub oak nearby, chewing dry grass with a kind of patience only animals have. Gideon held his hands out to the fire. Delia watched him without blinking. Eli curled up with Ruthie again, close enough to feel her chest rise and fall. I saw the wagons, Gideon said. 2 days back. Delia didn't respond. They weren't raiders, he added. She tensed. Then what were they? Mercenaries, paid hands. Maybe someone wanted the land y'all were headed to. She turned toward him, eyes sharp. You know that for sure? No, he said, but I know men who burn for pay, and I know what it looks like when they leave fast. Y'all were hit hard, but sloppy. No one buried the dead. No one stripped gear, just torched and ran. Delia shifted her weight. What does that mean? He stared into the flames. That someone scared them off. The silence thickened. Wind rustled branches overhead. The fire popped. Then Gideon said, Used to be a badge man, up near Dead Ridge. Before it turned red, Delia raised an eyebrow. You're a lawman. Was. Before they burned the jailhouse with my deputy inside. You let it happen? He looked up at her. His face didn't flinch. I was locked in the back room. They shot through the windows, poured kerosene under the walls, and waited. I made it out. He didn't. Delia said nothing, but the rifle now rested across her knees, not her shoulder. That was something. In the morning, Gideon boiled bark to make a bitter tea. Delia let the children sip it. It settled their stomachs. Later, he drew a rough map in the dirt. There's a rail stop 20 miles west, he said. Used to be a mining town. Might still be some folks holed up there. You think it's safe? I think it's shelter, he answered. That's not the same. No, he said, but it's better than dying thirsty. By midday, Delia had agreed to ride with him. The children rode in front of her on Gray Jack. Gideon walked beside the horse, one hand on the reins, the rifle strapped to his back, visible but untouched. They moved slow. Delia's feet blistered. Eli offered to trade boots, but she shook her head. You'll grow out of yours, she said. I won't. At camp that night, Ruthie finally asked, "Is he bad?" Delia looked at her. "Who?" "The man." Delia glanced toward Gideon, who sat sharpening a blade by firelight. His face was quiet, but not peaceful. She turned back to Ruthie. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think he's trying not to be." Ruthie accepted that. Children have a way of forgiving what adults never dare. The next morning, they crossed paths with a burned-out stagecoach. Delia moved ahead with caution, rifle ready. Gideon waited behind with the kids. She found no bodies, just the remains of what looked like a family's belongings. Trunks, dolls, a broken locket. She picked up the locket. Inside, a tiny portrait of a woman with pale eyes and ink-black hair. Not unlike her own, she tucked it into her pocket. Not for memory, but because it didn't deserve to be left alone. When she returned, Gideon was pacing. "I don't like this stretch of trail," he said. "You think they're near?" He looked up at the sky. No vultures, no animals, just quiet. Too quiet? He nodded. Delia pulled the rifle tighter to her chest. They walked faster that day. At dusk, they found wagon tracks, fresh ones, veering off the road and disappearing into a gulch. Gideon studied them. "Too deep for one wagon," he said. "Must have been heavy, or in a hurry. You want to follow?" He looked at her. "I want you and the kids to keep going. I'll scout." Delia stared at him hard. "I don't trust you." "You shouldn't," he said. "But if I don't come back by nightfall, turn back." She wanted to say no, but she didn't. Instead, she took the reins of Greyjack and led the children up the trail. And when she looked back, Gideon was already gone. Gideon Kane moved like a man who knew the weight of being watched. He didn't follow the wagon tracks directly. He walked parallel to them, 10 yards off, boots quiet on the gravel, hand resting near his sidearm but never drawing. The gulch narrowed ahead, two stone ridges pressing together like jaws, and the wagon ruts curved straight into its throat. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which meant only a fool would ride straight in. Gideon wasn't a fool, not anymore. He climbed the higher ridge on the left, moving slow. Every rock he stepped on, he checked first. Every echo, he listened for twice. At the top, he crouched and scanned the canyon floor. There it was, a wagon, half covered with brush. Wheels still intact. A tarp slung sloppily across the side, as if someone tried to hide it in a hurry. Smoke drifted up from behind the ridge. Not a campfire, a cooking fire. There were voices, 3, maybe 4. Men. One of them laughed, short, hard, and low. The kind of laugh men use when they think they've gotten away with something. Gideon pulled his rifle free, not to shoot, to see. The barrel had a slight polish still, enough to catch light. He angled it down, careful, using it to reflect the flames behind the rocks. Movement. One man standing, another sitting, the third pacing. He didn't recognize them, but their red neckerchiefs said plenty. Same group, same brand of filth. He narrowed his eyes. They hadn't seen him yet. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't know anyone had survived. He backed away slowly, then turned and sprinted across the ridgetop. Not fast, silent. Delia waited at the trail's edge, jaw set, eyes sweeping the hills. She'd kept the children behind her, crouched in a dip in the earth. Eli held a rock. Ruthie clutched the doll she'd saved from the wagon fire, a dirty thing with no arms but still with a face. When she saw Gideon reappear, she rose halfway, alone. He waved her back down, crouched beside her. 3 men, armed, cooking meat. Alive? He nodded. Not for long if we're lucky. Delia stared at him. I didn't come west to kill. Gideon looked her square in the eye. They killed the people you rode with. They lit them on fire. I came to start over. So did they, he said coldly, just not the same way. She didn't answer right away. Then, you gonna shoot them? If I don't, he said, they might find us before we find water. Delia looked down at Ruthie, then at Eli, then back at Gideon. Do it clean. He nodded once. It didn't take long. He circled again, waited for one of them to wander off to relieve himself, took him first, quick, quiet. The others didn't notice until the second dropped. The third ran. He didn't make it far. Gideon didn't smile when it was over. He just walked back to Delia and said, "We've got a wagon now." She didn't ask what he'd done with the bodies. She didn't ask their names. She just helped him strip their supplies: jerky, cartridges, water skins, and one worn map. Gideon read it aloud. "Looks like they were headed west, same as us. This wagon might be our best shot." Delia looked at the sky. "Storm's coming. Then we'd better move." They rode hard that afternoon. Ruthie laid in the back of the wagon with a blanket. Eli sat up front beside Gideon, watching the reins, learning how to steer without asking questions. Delia sat behind them, rifle across her knees, eyes never still. She didn't feel safer. She felt sharper. At camp, as thunder rumbled far off, Gideon finally spoke. "You didn't flinch." She didn't look at him. "No. First time most folks see death up close, it knocks the breath out of them." "It already did," she said, "last week." Gideon nodded, understanding. "You lost your husband?" Delia's jaw tightened. "No." "Then who?" She looked at him. "Everyone." Later, when the rain began, it wasn't heavy, just enough to wash the dust from their clothes, to make the world smell clean again, if only for a night. The children slept huddled. Delia stood alone by the fire, letting the drops soak her. Gideon approached slowly. "You ever shoot a man?" he asked. She didn't answer, so he added, "Would you?" She turned. "If I had to." "That's all it ever is," he said. "Until it's not." They stood in the rain, just long enough for it to feel like a baptism neither of them had asked for. They saw the town just before dusk. Low buildings slumped behind a battered gate, a rail line running half-rusted beside it like a forgotten promise. A crooked sign leaned into the wind. Calder's Bluff. Pop. 81, crossed out, written 73. Delia pulled the wagon reins as they approached. Dust rose in soft clouds, and behind her, Ruthie stirred awake with a dry cough. Eli sat up beside Gideon. "Is that a real town?" he asked. "Only one way to find out," Gideon said. But Delia already knew the answer. No wind carried baking bread. No hammers rang. No children laughed. A town like that didn't welcome strangers. It just endured them. At the gate, two men stood with rifles, one older, one young. Neither smiled. The older one stepped forward. "That's far enough," he said. "Ain't taking folks in. Too many mouths already." "We don't mean to stay," Gideon said, voice low. "Just need a place to rest the children." The man narrowed his eyes. "You're the ones came out of the fires?" Delia stiffened. "What's it to you?" "Just means trouble follows." Delia climbed down from the wagon. Her voice was hoarse, but it didn't shake. "We've buried more than we've brought. We've asked for nothing." The younger man shifted his rifle uneasily. "Town's had its fill of trouble. We don't take in orphans, drifters, or broken men with fast hands." "Then maybe you should stop being a town," Delia snapped. The older man's face twitched, but he didn't lower his weapon. "You want sympathy? Try the chapel." "We want water," Delia said, "and maybe an honest roof for one night." A moment passed. The wind scraped along the gateposts. Then a voice called from behind the walls. "Female. Clear." "Let him in, Walt." The older man swore under his breath. "You best be sure, Miss Porter." "I am." The gates opened with a reluctant groan. A woman stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, weather-tanned, dressed tucked into work boots. Her hair was tied back with a leather strip. She looked at Delia first, then at the rifle strapped to her side, then back to her eyes. "You got a name?" "Delia Thorne." "May Porter." They didn't shake hands, but neither blinked. That was enough. They were offered an old livery stable near the back of town. Dry hay, a few spare blankets, a tin stove that hissed when lit. Delia thanked her without saying it out loud. That night she fed the children from the remaining jerky, then sat by the open door and watched Gideon sharpen his knife by lantern glow. "You know her?" she asked. "Porter?" he said. "Heard the name. Dead Ridge survivor. Like me. You trust her?" "I don't trust anyone," he said, "but she's got that look." "What look?" "The kind of person who once needed help and didn't get it." In the morning, Delia walked into town alone. The stairs came fast and full of heat. Women pulled children inside. Men lowered their voices when she passed. Someone muttered the word trouble. She ignored them, walked straight to the well, drew water, refilled their canteens. When she turned, May was waiting. People here scare easy, May said. Delia raised a brow. They scare cruel, too. May cracked the faintest smile. That, too. They sat on the chapel steps, watching the light rise over the town. Why did you speak for me? Delia asked. May didn't answer right away, then said, because I saw myself 10 years ago, dust-covered, carrying someone else's babies, staring down a gate held shut by cowards. Delia looked down at her boots. Did they let you in? May shook her head. I took the side road, didn't stop until I hit the ridge, settled in a hunting shack, and waited for the world to grow back. Did it? May looked her in the eye. You're sitting in it. That night rain came again. Not heavy, but cleansing. Delia stood outside and let it fall across her shoulders. Gideon joined her. You ever think about staying? He asked. She turned. Here? Anywhere. She thought a moment. Then, not yet. Not until I stopped looking over my shoulder. He nodded, then said, You spoke louder today. She shrugged. No one else was going to. You didn't flinch. Flinching never stopped a gate from closing. He looked at her a long time, then added, You keep talking like that, they'll follow you. She smiled, just slightly. Then I hope I'm walking somewhere worth going. Calder's Bluff had never been a brave town. It survived by hiding, by saying yes to men who rode in with dust on their boots and iron on their hips, by closing its doors to strangers and lowering its eyes when the wind smelled like trouble. But that was before Delia Thorne arrived, and before the men who'd burned her world came looking for what was left of it. The first sign was a horse, riderless, bleeding from the flank. It staggered into the edge of town at sunrise, coated in sweat and panic, saddle hanging loose. Walt, the gatekeeper, caught it by the reins and saw the red neckerchief tied to the horn. His hands trembled. By midday, May Porter had called a meeting in the chapel. They're coming, she said, standing at the pulpit. Don't know when, don't know how many, but that horse was theirs. The townsfolk murmured. Some scoffed, some cursed, a few packed. Delia stood in the back, arms crossed. She waited for someone to ask the real question. Gideon was the one who did. How long do we have? May looked at Delia. Delia looked out the window toward the horizon. Not long enough, she said, but maybe just enough. That night, Gideon laid out the defense plan with stones and chalk on the floor of the livery. We can't hold the whole town, he said, but the central square is defendable. 2 choke points, a line of sight from the chapel roof. You sound like you've done this before, Delia said. I have, he answered. Didn't go well. Then this time, we do it different. Delia knocked on doors. She didn't ask. She told. You've got sacks? Fill them with grain. Stack them by the saloon window. Bring oil, but don't light anything until I say. Get the children underground. Cellars, wells, closets, anywhere low. They listened, not because she asked nicely, because she didn't flinch. Walt lowered his rifle when she passed. May handed her a satchel of ammunition without a word. And Gideon? He watched her with something like awe. Not love, not yet, but the quiet shock of a man who'd never seen leadership born from grief. At sunset, the wind changed. Again. Gideon felt it first. Smoke, he muttered. Delia sniffed the air. They're burning brush, trying to blind our line of sight. Means they're close. Means they're nervous. They came after nightfall. 7 men, riding hard, yelling, laughing, firing into the air. Delia stood behind the overturned wagon blocking Main Street and gave the order. Wait. The townspeople crouched behind barrels, behind crates, behind the weight of their own fear. The raiders dismounted. 2 of them approached the chapel. One raised a torch. Delia lifted her rifle. The shot rang out clean. He fell hard. The second dropped the torch and ran back toward his horse. More gunfire. A scream. May's voice barking orders behind the mercantile. Gideon moving like a ghost across rooftops, his revolver cold and fast. Delia saw everything. She didn't blink. But then she saw Walt fall. A bullet caught him in the shoulder as he tried to drag a child into shelter. Delia broke cover, ran, carried Walt to safety with Eli's help, blood trailing behind her like thread on a broken hem. "Why'd you do that?" Walt gasped. "Because this time we don't leave anyone behind," she said. By midnight, the shooting slowed. 3 raiders dead, 1 wounded and captured, 2 fled, and the last, the one with the burned hand and Wolf's grin, he stood on the hill above town, silhouetted by moonlight. "I'll be back," he shouted, "with more. You don't get to start over." Delia stepped out into the street, rifle in hand. Her voice cut the wind. "Then you better bring enough to finish what you started. 'Cause I won't run again." He stared at her for a moment, then spat, turned his horse, and vanished into the dark. At dawn, they buried the dead. 1 townsman, 2 strangers. Walt lived, barely. Delia sat beside him as he recovered in the chapel. He blinked up at her, confused. "You're not like the rest," he muttered. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." "You a mother?" "I don't know what I am anymore," she said, "but I know what I'm not. I'm not afraid of men who burn things and call it justice." That night, May came to the stable. She handed Delia a key. "To what?" Delia asked. "The east cabin. It's been empty since spring." "I can't pay." "You already did," May said. "And the children. They need doors now, not walls." Delia held the key for a long, silent moment, then said, "Doors it is." Gideon stood at the edge of town, watching the stars. Delia approached. "You leaving?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Should I?" She was quiet a long while. Then, "No, not yet." He looked at her, finally, and in his face she saw it. A man who still believed in guilt, but maybe, just maybe, was starting to believe in forgiveness. Delia woke to stillness. No screaming, no hooves, no fire. Only the quiet breath of children sleeping in real beds, under a real roof. She sat at the edge of the cot, bare feet on cool floorboards, watching the orange light of dawn climb the walls of the little cabin May had given her. There was a stove in the corner, a cracked window with patched cloth curtains, a door with a latch that closed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Eli stirred first. He rubbed his eyes, looked around, and whispered, "Is this ours now?" Delia brushed his hair back gently. "For now," she said, "if we make it so." "What if they come back?" She looked him in the eye. "Then we don't run. Not this time." He nodded. Didn't ask again. Later that morning, she stepped outside with a basket and a purpose. She walked through Calder's Bluff slowly. People nodded now. Some even said her name. Mrs. Hanley gave her a jar of pickled beans. Walt, arm in a sling, tipped his hat with his left hand. May met her by the well with a quiet smile and a folded paper. "It's a land deed," she said. "That cabin's yours now. Voted on it last night." Delia stared at it. "You don't have to do this." "We already did." Delia took it in both hands. Her voice cracked. "Thank you." May leaned in. "Don't thank me. Just stay." Gideon was at the edge of town again. Same ridge, same coat, same look in his eyes. Delia walked up beside him, arms crossed. "You keep staring like that, folks will start thinking you've got a past you're running from." "I do." "Well, so do I," she said. He smiled, just barely. "You think we're safe now?" Delia looked out over the horizon. "No one's ever safe out here, but maybe we're home." That night, Gideon came to the cabin. He didn't knock, just stood in the doorway, holding something wrapped in oilcloth. When she opened it, she saw it was a photograph, faded, curled at the edges. A younger Gideon, a man in uniform, a woman beside him, hand on his chest. "My brother," he said, "and the girl I should have stayed for." Delia looked at him, then down at the photo. "What happened?" "They trusted me to bring them west. I got them lost. Raiders took the rest." He swallowed. "I never forgave myself." Delia stepped forward. "You don't have to be forgiven to keep going. You just have to walk." He nodded once. Gideon didn't answer, but he didn't move either. He stood there, oilcloth bundle still in his hands, as if waiting for permission he didn't know how to ask for. Then slowly he walked past Delia, out the back door of the cabin, into the night that still smelled faintly of rain and cut wood. Delia watched him go, but didn't follow. Not yet. Out near the fence line, where the peach sapling stood thin and fragile, Gideon stopped. He crouched, slow, stiff, and pressed one knee into the damp earth. He set the photo down beside the tree, unwrapped it carefully, smoothed the edges. Then he whispered something, not to her, not even to himself, but to the ground. A few words, a name, maybe a promise. Then he dug, just with his hands, bare and quiet, pulled back a shallow scoop of soil and tucked the photo beneath it, face down. He covered it gently, patted it flat, and sat back on his heels. For a long time, he didn't move. Delia stepped out onto the porch. He didn't look up. She didn't call his name. She just waited. When he finally rose, his hands were coated in mud, but his shoulders were lighter. And when he turned to face her, there was no need to speak, because his eyes had changed. Still weary, but no longer haunted. Still silent, but no longer hiding. He had buried more than a photograph. He had buried the man who hadn't known how to stay. Delia nodded once, and without a word he walked back toward the cabin. Not fast, not ashamed, just steady, and didn't walk away. Spring came. The ground softened. Eli helped plant beans near the fence. Ruthie tied ribbons in the peach sapling someone left on their doorstep. Delia cleaned the stove, then the windows, then the whole damn yard. She didn't do it because she had to. She did it because it was the first time in a long time she wanted to. One Sunday, the townsfolk gathered near the well. Delia didn't know why. May called her to the front and simply said, "This woman reminded us who we are." There were no speeches, just nods. And then someone handed her a hammer. Not a gun, not a torch, just a tool to help build the new schoolhouse. She took it, with both hands, and drove the first nail. The sound echoed, not loud, not sharp, just final. Like punctuation at the end of a long, breathless sentence. Delia stood there, hammer still in her hand, palm buzzing from the impact. She stared at the nail she'd just driven into the first beam of the new schoolhouse. It wasn't perfect. It leaned slightly left, but it held, and so did she. The children clapped behind her, just once, hesitant, then together. Ruthie's small hands made the loudest noise of all. Eli grinned. He didn't cheer, but he nodded, proud. May stepped beside her. "You ever build before?" she asked. Delia shook her head. May smiled. "Could have fooled me." Delia looked out over the field. The soil was soft again. Green was coming back. But this was different. This was foundation, not of wood, of choice. For the first time since the fires, since the smoke and ash and silence, Delia wasn't surviving. She was staying. And the nail in that beam, it was proof, not just to the town, not just to the children, but to herself. At dusk, she sat beside Gideon on the chapel steps. "Feels like something's beginning," she said. He leaned back, arms resting on his knees. "Or maybe," he said, "we just made it far enough to see what was always trying to begin." She thought about that, about the fire, the silence, the first night with the children in the rocks. She thought about how much of her had died back there, and how much more had grown since. They didn't speak of destiny, or fate, or faith. They spoke through action, through showing up, through holding the line when no one else would. Delia Thorne never asked to lead. Gideon Kane never thought he'd stop running. But in a forgotten town where dust once ruled and fear kept the doors shut, they did something most folks never dare. That night, after the schoolhouse beam had been set and supper cleared, Delia tucked Ruthie into bed with a kiss on her temple. The little girl didn't stir. Her sleep had softened. No more whimpers, no more clutching her arms tight in her dreams. Eli sat on the edge of his cot, staring out the window. He wasn't crying. He wasn't speaking. Delia knelt beside him. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. Then, "It doesn't feel like we have to run anymore." She swallowed. "We don't. Even if bad men come, they might," she said honestly. "But this time, we're not alone, and we're not small." Eli was quiet. Then he said, "I had a dream last night." "Yeah?" "I was back at the fire, but this time you didn't run away. You turned and walked into it. She froze. Was I okay? He nodded. You found us on the other side. Delia didn't speak. Her throat was too full. Eli looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much and said, "Can I sleep with the window open tonight?" She blinked. Why? Because I don't think I have to listen for footsteps anymore. Delia smiled through the ache in her chest. You can. He curled under the quilt, head sinking into the pillow like it had finally given permission. She watched him breathe, slow, even, whole. And that night, for the first time since the trail burned behind them, he slept with both eyes closed. They stayed. Not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because the children were watching and the earth was listening. And the people, slowly, stubbornly, were ready to remember what it meant to believe in something worth planting. The wind cut across the desert like a blade as Evelyn Ashford spurred her horse harder. Her eyes were narrowed, lips split from heat and grit. Blood soaked the seam of her side, but she didn't feel it. Behind her, 4 riders, armed, fast, cruel. Royce Mather's hounds. Ahead, just red dirt and an endless stretch of dying light. She hadn't stopped running since she left Silas, her husband, kneeling beside a shallow grave on his own land. Shot in the back, in front of her. There was nothing in her hands, no gun, no canteen, but something inside her burned hotter than July sun. You stop, you die, Silas used to say. But Evelyn wasn't running just to live anymore. That day, riding through dust and thunder, Evelyn Ashford changed. And that name, once whispered kindly in supper prayers, would soon ride the wind like a warning. She was the widow of a murdered man, but no one had written the ending for her kind. So she would. The sky turned orange the night they came. Evelyn Ashford had just placed a kettle on the stove when she heard the first shot. At first, she thought it might be thunder, until Silas didn't answer when she called his name. Then came the second shot, this time closer. She ran to the porch, skirts gathered in her fists, boots thudding against the pine floorboards. Outside, the horses screamed. Men shouted, men she didn't recognize. And in the middle of it all, stumbling backward from the well, was Silas. Blood bloomed across his vest like a red flower. He crumpled before her eyes. Evelyn didn't scream. She moved. Inside, to the bureau. She pulled the satchel from beneath the floorboard, shoved in the papers Silas had signed just last week. The deed, the notary seal, even the crude map of the ridgeland. She grabbed the revolver, barely loaded, and ran out the back before the front door burst open. Royce Mather's men. She'd seen them in town. Brash, smiling too much, laughing too loud. Now they had torches, and she had 10 seconds. Evelyn didn't look back. She mounted her mare bareback, clung low to the neck, and rode into the trees with nothing but papers, steel, and a name they'd forgotten to cross off. She rode for 3 nights. No food, no water, save what she caught in the folds of her cloak when it rained the second morning. She kept to the high ridges out of sight. Her mare died on the 4th day, legs broken in a gopher hole. Evelyn slit its throat herself, whispered thanks, and kept walking. Her boots blistered, her lips cracked. Her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. By the time she stumbled upon the abandoned trapper's shack near Widow's Fork, she was half mad with fever. That's where she hid. For days, no one came. No one knew. She boiled roots, slept beside the hearth, watched snow fall through a crack in the roof, and told herself she wasn't waiting for rescue, because she wasn't. Silas was dead. Royce had the town in his pocket. The iron spur was burning or worse, and every name that could have helped her was either scared or already buried. But she still had the deed, still had proof, still had a name. She found her strength slowly, like gathering coals from cold ash. One morning she stood before the cracked mirror and didn't flinch. Her face had changed, not from the bruise along her jawline or the thin scar above her brow, but from the way she held her eyes now. Silas used to say she had soft eyes. That softness was gone. In its place, something sharp. That night she made a decision. Not with fanfare, not even aloud, just 3 quiet steps. 1. She dug a trench behind the shack and buried the papers in a tin biscuit box. 2. She packed only what she could carry: half a loaf, one jar of water, a broken knife. 3. She headed east, not to flee, but to return, not to mourn, but to reckon. The valley below Iron Spur looked the same when she saw it again, wide, golden, windswept. But Evelyn wasn't the same woman who'd ridden out of it. She stood at the ridgeline, hidden beneath a hooded cloak, staring down at the land that should have been hers, the land her husband died for. She counted 5 men near the corral. None she recognized. The barn had been rebuilt. Smaller now. The smokehouse chimney no longer leaned left. They were settling in, like they'd won. Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. They hadn't seen her. Good. She turned and walked the long way down, through the dry wash and under the trees, where the old irrigation channel once fed the north pasture. She didn't go near the front gate. She knew better. Instead, she went to where she used to meet the mail rider, a mile from the house past the split rock, and there, like clockwork, he came. Finn Booker, barely 20, with a limp he'd gotten from a bar fight and too much heart for his own good. He slowed when he saw her, hand hovering near the satchel slung across his chest. "Mrs. Ashford," she nodded once. "They think I'm dead?" "Most folks do." "Good. You come back to die or to do something?" "I came back," she said, "to make sure they regret every breath since the one they took from Silas." Finn looked at her a long moment, then he dismounted. "I kept your letter," he said. "Figured you might need your handwriting back." Evelyn smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, she slept in the hayloft of a nearby abandoned cabin Finn had cleared out months ago. He left her with a sack of oats, a canteen, and a lantern. "Don't strike it till after moonset," he said. "Too many eyes." She didn't. She waited. And when the moon slipped behind the ridge, she lit the lantern, spread the papers across the floor, and began to plan. She'd been a rancher's wife. Now she would be the architect of a reckoning. Tomorrow she'd walk into dry wells with her head high, her back straight, and fire stitched into her spine. They had taken everything, but not her name, not her land, not her will. Dust hung in the air like a second sun, pale and mean. Evelyn wrapped a faded scarf over her face and pulled the brim of her hat lower, just enough to cast a shadow over her eyes. She hadn't set foot in dry wells since Silas's funeral, if you could call what they gave him a funeral. No one expected the widow to come back, so she didn't. Not as Evelyn Ashford. Now she was just another traveler. Boots worn, cloak dusted, hands calloused, the kind no one looked at twice. But she looked. Every signboard, every storefront, every man who stood a little too tall, every badge that glinted without a soul behind it. Royce Mather's reach was long. At the general store, she paused by the barrels of flour. Silas used to say the place smelled like apples and rope. Today it just smelled tired. She didn't go inside, just waited, head low, ears open. "Shipment's short again," the clerk grumbled. "Royce's men came through last night," someone replied. "Cleared out 2 crates, said it was for ranch security." Evelyn didn't need to hear more. That's how he did it, slow and steady theft. Call it protection, call it tax, call it anything but what it was. War by paper cuts. She moved on. At the smithy, Jackal Yates, once a man of thick arms and louder opinions, was now hunched, eyes dull, hammer strokes slow. She caught sight of a brand new horseshoe with Royce's cattle mark burned into the iron. He didn't see her, or pretended not to. At the water pump, a boy no older than 8 stared too long. Evelyn shifted slightly, ready to duck behind the trough, but the boy just gave a slight nod, like he'd seen ghosts before and knew better than to call them by name. She kept walking. Near dusk, Evelyn slipped behind the church and into the back alley of the Scorpion's Tail. Drywell's only saloon that didn't pretend to be anything else. She waited under the awning, half hidden in shadow. Inside, Royce's men were loud. "To Silas!" one shouted, raising a glass. "Poor fool!" Laughter. "Boss said it had to be done. Ashford was getting too mouthy, signing papers, calling in surveyors. Hell, I say we did him a favor." Evelyn's grip tightened around the satchel strap. She wanted to burst in, scream, slam one of their smug faces into the wall. But she didn't. She listened. Another voice. "What about the wife?" Gone, dead in the hills somewhere. If not, she will be. She had fire, that one. Yeah, well, fire don't last long out here. More laughter. Boots thudded on wood. Someone smashed a glass. Then quieter. Still, Royce wants that deed. You think she really had it on her? Evelyn slipped away before the answer came. Back at the old hay barn, abandoned since the previous owner went blind and left for Missouri, she kindled a small flame behind a wall of crates. Just enough heat to warm her fingers and bake a bit of cornmeal into something passable. Her scarf lay in her lap, dust-caked. Her reflection in the tin cup was nearly unrecognizable. Not just dirt and shadows, but purpose. The words from the saloon rang in her ears. Royce wants that deed. So that's why they hadn't burned the land down completely. They needed the claim, needed to make it look legal. And the only piece missing? Her. The next morning, Evelyn rose before first light and walked a narrow path along the creek bed. The sheriff's office stood near the edge of town, one lantern burning inside, but no one awake yet. She didn't approach the front door. Instead, she crossed the street to the old stable where Silas once boarded their second mare. It was falling apart now, half the roof missing, but the side wall still bore the notch marks where Silas used to measure each horse's height. She ran her hand along the wood, then crouched and pried up the loose board near the corner. The same hollow was still there, empty, but it had once held letters, receipts, titles, things they couldn't afford to keep in plain sight. It was then she realized. Royce must have searched the house, found nothing, which meant he thought she had the deed on her when she fled, which meant he still thought she was out there, dying. Good. Let him believe it a while longer. Evelyn returned to the barn with three things in mind. 1. She needed an ally, someone not bought. 2. She needed a place no one would search twice. 3. She needed to act before Royce made his next move. Because he would. That boy in the general store, his father was likely forced to give up supplies. The smithy, already folding under pressure, and the sheriff, too quiet to be clean. That night, Evelyn made a list, not on paper, just in her head. People who still owed Silas a kindness. People who might believe a ghost if it spoke the right name. And people who needed reminding. Land isn't taken with bullets, it's taken with silence. And Evelyn Ashford had been silent long enough. Evelyn didn't sleep much that night. The barn creaked in the wind, and rats scurried in the walls. But her mind stayed fixed on one thing. They were still afraid of the deed. That meant she still had power. It was time to use it. By dawn, she'd already traded her cloak for a dust-stained poncho she'd found hanging behind the stable. Her hat sat lower now, and she walked with a limp she didn't have, just enough to look forgettable. She headed east, toward the part of Dry Wells no one talked about unless they had to. The flats, where people owed more than they owned. Where Royce didn't send his men unless they needed something taken or someone silenced. And where Emmett Grady still lived, if he hadn't drunk himself into the dirt. She found him behind the tannery, asleep on a stool with a bottle tucked under one arm and a small, three-legged dog curled at his feet. Get up, Emmett, she said quietly. He jolted awake, blinking hard. The dog growled once, then stopped. Evelyn didn't remove her scarf. Didn't need to. His eyes narrowed. Eve? Didn't die, she said. Sorry to disappoint. Emmett stood, slow and crooked, like his joints were remembering how. Whole town thinks your bone's in the canyon. I know. He rubbed his face, then stared at her. Royce thinks he owns everything now. The land, the law. Ain't been right since Silas passed. You really come back to take him on? No, she said. I came back to end it. They sat behind the tannery wall, sharing cold coffee from a tin mug while she laid it out. The deed, the forged land grabs, the quiet way Royce erased people and rewrote their names on paper that stank of blood. You got proof? I buried it. Smart. I need you to help me dig it up. Emmett laughed once, then coughed for a full minute. When he caught his breath, he nodded. You're lucky I owe your husband a debt. You don't owe Silas, she said. You owe the truth. That shut him up. Later that afternoon, Evelyn moved through town like fog. She stopped by the livery, overheard a drunk foreman complaining about the South Ridge fences being down. Good. That meant Royce's men were stretched thin. She passed the dress shop, now run by Royce's cousin's wife. In the window she saw herself, leaner, harder, eyes more flint than flame. That woman didn't need permission. That woman took it. Emmett met her at dusk, just outside of town. They hiked 2 miles through dry brush until they reached the trapper's shack she'd hidden in after Silas died. She moved a rock, then another, then dug with her bare hands. The tin box was still there. Inside the deed, the notary seal, and Silas's journal, half burned but legible. She handed Emmett the journal. Read it. He did. And by the time he looked up, he wasn't shaking anymore. This, he said, could bury Royce. Maybe even the sheriff. That's the idea. Back in town, Royce was restless. His men had returned from a failed search up north. No sign of Evelyn. No tracks. Just bones of an old mare in a gully, and enough fear to keep them lying through their teeth. She's gone, one insisted. Starved or froze. Either way, she ain't a problem no more. But Royce didn't like loose ends, especially ones with titles and signatures. He poured himself a drink and stared at the ledger. The Ashford land was still listed as pending transfer. That wasn't good enough. He wanted it stamped. Final. That night, Evelyn made her first real move. She returned to the Scorpion's Tail. This time she wasn't hiding. The place had gone quiet. Most of the men were out at the southern ridge. Only 3 sat near the back table, playing cards. Royce's men, but younger. Mean-eyed and talkative. Evelyn approached the bar, hood still up, voice low. I need a message delivered. The bartender looked her over, shrugged. Ain't no post out this time of night. It's for Mr. Mather, she said, and it don't need a stamp. She handed over a folded piece of paper. No name, just 4 words in Silas's handwriting. You missed one, Royce. She turned and left before the barkeep opened it. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. By the time Royce read it, she'd already crossed the creek and lit the small lantern in Emmett's shed. There she spread the papers across the table. The land deed, the notary's stamp, Silas's maps, and her plan. The war had begun, not with bullets, but with words. But when the time came for fire, she'd be ready for that too. Evelyn folded the scarf one last time and laid it aside. She wasn't Evelyn Ashford anymore. She was the storm they thought had passed, and this time it had a name. The letter arrived just before dawn. Royce sat at the head of his long cedar table, cigar smoke curling into a haze above his silver breakfast tray. His boots rested on a bearskin rug, half a biscuit forgotten, beside a still warm cup of chicory coffee. He unfolded the note, still sealed with a smudge of wax. No greeting, just, you missed one. S.A.A. He read it twice, then a third time. A flush rose up his neck. She's alive, he growled. Across the room, Vernon Pike, Royce's oldest enforcer, shifted in his chair. Thought you said she was dead. Royce stood and slammed the paper down. Thought wrong. She was bleeding bad, Royce. Ain't nobody survives a fall like that. Royce leaned in. She ain't nobody. She's Evelyn Ashford. And if she's writing notes, that means she has something to say, which means we're not done yet. He grabbed his coat and turned to Pike. Put eyes on the notary. If she's showing papers, I want to know what. If she's digging, I want to know where. And if she's breathing, Pike nodded. I'll handle it. Across town, Evelyn moved with deliberate ease. She no longer clung to shadows. Not quite in the open, not quite hiding, just in motion, like a ghost that no longer cared whether it was seen. Her satchel now held Silas's journal, the deed, and a folded map of the surrounding claims, each marked where Royce's new fences had popped up like weeds after rain. She stopped by the old schoolhouse, now boarded up and left to rot. Silas once said teaching was the only honest job in Dry Wells. She ran her fingers across the cracked wood of the doorframe, then crouched and tucked a small leather pouch behind a loose plank. Not the deed. That stayed on her, but something Royce would miss. A copy. She wasn't planning to outgun him. She was going to outlast him. That afternoon, Emmett met her by the creek. He brought news. "They're sniffing around the notary's office," he said. Royce sent Pike in person. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Did they find anything?" "Not yet, but the clerk's nervous. Too nervous. Might cave if pushed." "Then we push first." Emmett blinked. "Meaning?" Evelyn pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "A notarized transfer of rights. Unsigned. We take this to Harlan Brooks." Emmett frowned. "The preacher?" "His ledger, his signature. Dry Wells might have sold its soul, but folks still believe in ink and scripture. You think Royce won't burn a church to the ground if it stands in his way?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Let him try." That night she approached the church from the rear, slipping through the old herb garden where weeds had overtaken the basil. The chapel stood crooked, lit only by a single oil lamp near the altar. Harlan Brooks, white-haired and thin as a rake, looked up from his ledger. His eyes narrowed, then widened. Evelyn?" She nodded once. "I need your help." She laid the paper on the table, explained everything. The deed, the forged claims, Silas's last entries, the threat Royce posed, not just to her land, but to the entire valley. The preacher said nothing for a long time. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out an old stamp, worn from years of baptisms, weddings, and property blessings. "I've been waiting," he said softly, "for someone to stand up again." He signed, stamped, sealed. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Evelyn felt a weight lift from her spine. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a witness, and this time she had paper to prove it. But Royce moved faster than she expected. That same night, Pike found the copy Evelyn had hidden behind the schoolhouse plank. He brought it straight to Royce. "She's playing you," Pike said. "Using town folks, planning duplicates." Royce didn't answer at first, just stared at the paper. Then he smiled. "A woman with fight," he murmured. "I can respect that." He folded the page carefully, tucked it in his vest, and turned toward the fire. "But I'll still bury her." The following morning, flyers appeared across town, tacked to fences, nailed to doors, slipped under barrels and storefront planks. Wanted for forgery, trespassing, and land fraud. Evelyn Ashford, arrest on sight, authorized by Sheriff Mercer, endorsed by Royce Mather. A bounty, $50, dead or alive. By sunset, Evelyn stood on the ridge above Dry Wells, the flyer clenched in her hand. So it begins, she thought. The town might believe what it reads. But paper lies. So does fear. She tucked the flyer in her coat and turned toward the horizon. She had a preacher's seal, a traitor's help, and now a reason to burn everything down. The sun rose blood orange over Dry Wells. By the time its full weight spilled across the town's warped roofs and dusty alleys, everyone had seen the flyers. Some tore them down. Most didn't. Evelyn moved fast, staying clear of the sheriff's office, the general store, the saloon, anywhere Royce had long fingers. But it didn't matter. She could feel the shift in the air, the hush when she walked past, the sidelong glances, the sudden silence in conversation. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a name with a price, and some folks would sell their kin for less than $50. In the flats, an old washerwoman tugged Evelyn into a back room by her sleeve. "You ain't safe," she hissed. "Royce sent word to every ranch within 50 miles. "I know," Evelyn replied, calm. "He means to drag you through town in chains. Or worse." Evelyn pulled the folded preacher-sealed document from her coat and laid it on the rickety table. "Then I hope he comes close enough to read this before he tries." The woman stared at the seal. Then she nodded, slow and fearful. "Your Silas was a good man. I don't plan to waste what he died for." Meanwhile, Emmett worked the other side of town, quietly delivering copies of Silas's journal to those Evelyn remembered as trustworthy. The blacksmith, the old schoolmaster, even the stage driver who once hauled lumber for the Ashford Ranch. Some shook their heads, some cried, and one, Clara Jo, Royce's estranged cousin, slammed her door, then slid a crate of dried food onto the porch minutes later. People were choosing sides. By midday, Evelyn made her way to the North Ridge where the creek still cut clean through the rocks. Silas had once carved initials into a sycamore there. They were gone now, stripped by age or knife, but the place still remembered. Emmett met her there, out of breath, his hat soaked with sweat. They're moving tonight, he said. Pike's men. South Field. They're gonna torch it. Evelyn frowned. That's Carson's land. It's what Royce does. If someone hesitates, he burns something they love. Evelyn stared at the horizon, then turned back toward Drywell's. Not this time. That night, Evelyn approached the south field alone. The wind carried the sharp scent of kerosene. 3 riders waited near the edge of the tall grass, torches still unlit, laughing softly about Coyne and Carson's stupidity. They didn't see her until she was close enough to speak. You light those and you'll be the ones burning. They turned, startled, then laughed. Ashford, one said, didn't think we'd find you so easy. You didn't. I found you. The torchbearer stepped forward. There's a bounty, sweetheart. We ain't got time for speeches. Evelyn pulled Silas's rifle from beneath her poncho. Didn't raise it. Didn't have to. You've got one chance to ride back and tell Royce. If he wants a war, I'll bring it to his doorstep. One of them faltered. The other 2 didn't. The torch hit the dirt. The gun clicked, ready. Then, hoofbeats. Not from her, from behind the ridge. Carson and 6 men, farmers worn but ready, rode down with shovels and wet sacks, already shouting. The 3 arsonists scattered like crows. Evelyn didn't smile, didn't blink, just turned and walked into the night. The next morning, Carson stood beside her on the steps of the old schoolhouse, now scrubbed clean. He nodded toward the horizon. You think Royce got the message? Evelyn handed him a bundle of papers. You'll deliver these to the circuit judge when he arrives next week. Assuming Royce doesn't bribe or bury him first, then we make sure he can't. Carson looked at her. You really think this town's worth saving? Evelyn turned toward the Ashford ranch, still miles off but in her blood like marrow. It was never about saving it. It's about reclaiming what was stolen. Inside Royce's house, Vernon Pike stared at the report. Failed arson. Witnesses. A preacher's seal. Royce poured himself a drink, slow and silent. She's forcing our hand, Pike muttered. No, Royce said. She's forcing our face into the mirror. He sipped. Problem is, I still like what I see. Pike raised an eyebrow. What do we do? Royce set the glass down and smiled. We finish it. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the barn behind Carson's home, oil lamp flickering against the dark. She ran her fingers across the old notary stamp, then over Silas's name in the ledger. There was no peace in her yet, but there was purpose, and that would do. The town square had never been this quiet. Dry wells had seen lynchings, weddings, 2 fires, and a flood, but never this. Not a gun drawn yet, not a word shouted, but the air crackled like storm glass. Evelyn stood at the foot of the courthouse steps, rifle strapped to her back, Silas's documents in her hand. Her coat was dusted with trail and ash, but her eyes were bright. Focused. Across from her, Royce Mather dismounted slowly, adjusting his vest like a man about to deliver a sermon. His men fanned out behind him, 10 at least, armed. Sheriff Mercer stood between them, sweat dotting his brow. There's no need for this to go south. It already did, Evelyn said. Her voice was even, steady. When you let a killer take this town piece by piece. Royce smiled like a banker. Let's not be dramatic. You forged my husband's signature. You bribed surveyors. You killed anyone who stood in your way, including Silas. Gasps rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Royce shrugged. Silas was a loud man with a bad habit of being right. He got in the way. Evelyn stepped forward. And I'm here to finish what he started. She handed a thick envelope to Mercer. Signed, stamped, notarized. By the preacher, the clerk, and 3 witnesses. Mercer flipped it open. Read. His face went pale. Behind Evelyn, Emmett, Carson, and half a dozen townsfolk stood with quiet defiance. No guns drawn, just presence. A line. Royce looked around. For the first time, he saw hesitation in his own men. One stepped back. Another lowered his hand from his holster. Pike, ever loyal, whispered to Royce, "We can still end this." Royce shook his head. "They want a show? Let's give them one." He drew. Evelyn moved first. The rifle was already aimed, one shot. Pike fell, clutching his leg. Royce fired, missed, and ducked behind the well post. Screams broke out, then thunder, but not from the sky, from Evelyn's rifle. She advanced like a memory too old to fade. Chaos erupted, but Evelyn wasn't aiming to kill, only to end it. Two more shots disarmed Royce's men. The townsfolk pushed forward, not with weapons but with rage. Years of silence snapped like dry branches. Carson tackled one of Royce's hired guns. A stable boy swung a shovel. Sheriff Mercer raised both hands. Enough! The square fell still. Royce emerged from behind the well post, bleeding from the shoulder, his pride shattered. He looked at Evelyn, eyes blazing. You think they'll follow you? You're a widow with dirt for a name. She stepped forward, inches away now. No, she said. I'm Ashford. And that dirt you spit on? It's mine. She looked to Mercer. He nodded and cuffed Royce Mather. Later, as the circuit judge rode into town 3 days ahead of schedule, Evelyn stood on the porch of the old Ashford house, its roof repaired, its gate rehung. Children played in the yard. Joelle, the preacher's niece, taught reading at the schoolhouse again. The south field had been reseeded. And Evelyn? She sat with Silas's journal in her lap. A new page opened. In town, they still whispered about that morning, about how one woman faced down a man who thought himself king, how she didn't come back to beg. She came to reclaim, and in doing so gave dry wells its spine again. Some fights aren't about revenge. They're about remembering who you are and refusing to let someone else write the end of your story. Evelyn Ashford didn't set out to become a hero. She just refused to stay silent, refused to let fear grow where roots and love once lived. And because of that, dry wells stood tall again. If this story spoke to you, if you felt the fire in Evelyn's stand, the ache in her silence, or the power and justice finally done, we'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below. What moment hit you the hardest? Which character's courage stayed with you? And tell us where you're watching from. Your city, your town, or that one dusty road that shaped your story too. If you believe strength can look like a widow with a rifle and a ledger full of truth, leave a like, share this with someone who needs reminding that courage still counts, and don't forget to subscribe. This is Wild West Stories, where land is hard, hearts are harder, but justice still rides. We'll see you on the next trail. Until then, stay sharp, ride steady, and don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours.